Hello YouTube. This time around I wanted to talk about the Kodak motormatic 35 and its variants. This camera, which was a successor to the automatic 35, the major and really only significant difference between the two would have been the clockwork drive. Released in 1960, it was produced until about 1969. New in 1960, it cost about $109, adjusted for inflation in 2020 dollars. That's about 950 bucks for this camera. So some of the features of this camera are pretty mild by today's standards, but they were fairly impressive in their day. Let's see. You had with the motormatic 35, no suffix, just the plain initial model. You had the option for automatic or manual on the shutter. It's got a selenium cell, and in automatic, it would pick, based on the amount of light, it would pick your f-stop for you based on your choice of shutter speeds. These cameras were a little bit limited. You had, I think, at most 4 shutter speeds. This one's listed for a 40th, an 80th, 125th, and a 250th. It has provision for your ASA, which is interesting because a lot of cameras at the time did not. And this one, all these motormatics have a pretty broad variety of ASA settings. There's like 20, ranging from about 400 down to, I think, 10. And you achieve that by holding the center button down and turning that outer ring. It's got a clockwork drive, and when new, once this thing was fully wound, it could shoot off 9 to 10 frames almost as quick as you could push the trigger on this. It has 2 windows, but it is not a rangefinder. That I think is the biggest drawback to this. You're focusing by estimating. Your focus is right here at the focus ring in the very front, which is not coupled to anything, and it's calibrated like most of them are, from 3 feet to infinity. It has 2 basic settings, daylight and flash, on the big outer ring, or I don't know what you'd call it, command ring. It's locked in place. It's got a release. You push that release, you can crank it around to flash, and with flash you have guide numbers to direct you. I don't know much about the guide numbers or even how to use that feature, so I won't go into it. I only know that it's there and it's for flash. If you wanted to pick your own aperture, you would take this button right here, push it over to the right, and there's a little wheel under the viewfinder. You turn that wheel, and you probably can't see it, but there's a green pointer inside this plastic window that goes back and forth, and you can select whatever aperture you want, and again, that would be based upon whatever shutter speed you want. What else? It's heavy. It's mostly bakelite and metal. It feels very solid. It takes a generic Kodak flash. You can screw it onto the side. The newer models, like let's see, there were several. I got it written down here. The motormatic 35B, F, and R4. Now the drawback with those is that they don't have a provision for manual. They are fully automatic. Well, you have to set your shutter speed. Aperture is automatic. And that's important later on. It has a 4-element 44mm lens, good for 2.8, so it's a pretty slow lens. However, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Ectonar. It's an Ectonar lens, which in my experience is, I think all of the more expensive Kodak lenses were pretty good for what they were, given their target, their price range and their consumer base. I don't know if I mentioned, it has a frame counter, and this is your rewind release. And how one of the things that does, you maybe just heard it, when you hit the rewind release lever, it releases all the tension on the drive spring and unlocks your take-up spool. This camera has film in it, so I can't open that one up, but I'll open this one up for you. And there's the inside. It's all heavy cast bakelite metal framing and some loose parts that are foamed in. 60 years, you take what you get. This also has a battery compartment for this model. I'll open that for you. And this is one of the things that is actually kind of a drawback with these in later years. Loosen that screw, and that door opens up, and there's your battery compartment. This one is in fair condition. It's obviously had leaky batteries in it, but it's okay for what it is. I will never use it with flash bulbs, so it doesn't make a whole lot of difference to me. These later models, this one's a 35F, does not have the provision for the garden variety external flash. And also, this cold shoe here, somebody added that. That's not, it didn't come from the factory like that. It's right over, actually it's a trap door. It's right stuck to the trap door for the flash bulb. That's the flash bulb reflector. I think that's kind of a cheesy feature, but it was the early 60s, so what do you expect? Alright, so to load this bad boy up with film, like any other camera, I'll go through it anyhow. The release is on the right hand side. Push it up, open the door, pull out the whatchamacallit, and you pull that over and you crank this around until you have the open spot on the take-up spool, and there's a tiny little tooth right down here. It'll grab the film. So you lay the film in there so that that tooth grabs the sprocket hole. Close it up, and it's made so that it'll take up a few inches of film before it actually engages the drive. And you wind this thing up, and we'll see how many frames it'll actually fire off on a winding 60 years later. 1. I don't know why I did that. Alright. Well, there again, 60 years old. Not sure why I did that. I guess it doesn't really matter right now. But that's, in working order, that's how you load this thing. The drawback with this one, besides the film take-up malfunctioned, it's a newer model, it's a later model, and does not have a manual override. So you are dependent upon the selenium cell working. Now in this one, the selenium cell does work, which is a good thing. because otherwise I wouldn't be able to use it at all. So this is a camera that I have. I've gone over a lot of cameras that I haven't used in the field or just repaired and just not tested. This one I have used, and I have had excellent luck with it. I run, well, not a lot of film, 3-4 rolls through it, and I got very good quality pictures, very sharp, very clear. The 4-element lens, I think, is as good as anything else in the price range. 44 millimeters, a little bit of an oddball, but it's fixed, so you can't change it out. I guess it doesn't really matter. 2.8, not fast at all. And this one has not malfunctioned on me, at least not yet. As far as working on them, they are a pain. There's a lot of stuff. It's not complicated, but there's just a lot of stuff. Once you get this nose off, there's a lot of back and forth, very busy stuff that has to be just right to get the two halves both apart and then back together again. The clockwork for the drive isn't terrible, but you have to hold several parts so that they don't spring apart together to get it assembled. But really, it's heavy and sturdy enough. A lot of people will criticize the motormatic for its build quality. It's less than what it could have been. I think it was a superbly made camera. I think it was relatively ingenious for its time. I'll show you a couple of parts donors here. Here's one that's been largely disassembled for parts. This is mostly, the body is plastic with metal plates and reinforcement. It's Bakelite, pseudo-plastic. I think the build quality is excellent. Stamped steel, a lot of metal, very heavy. And this one, even in its present condition, the selenium meter is still reactive, which is kind of important if you actually want to use one. And this is just the same thing, only different. Here's a look at the inside of the I don't know what you call this, the lens body. Metal, all metal. I think well made, sturdy. It's not Rolls-Royce, and it's certainly not a Leica, but it is built, for its market. It's a sturdy camera. Like anything else, I suppose if you take care of it, it'll serve you well. So, to wrap this thing up, Kodak motormatic, in my opinion, is a good solid camera. It takes great pictures. I've used it. I've enjoyed it, and I plan on using it in the future. A few last thoughts. If you want to buy one and use it, you can afford to be a little bit particular. They're not rare. I think the most I might have paid for any of these was $10. Frequently they sell for a little more, but I don't pay that much for cameras. If you want one just to display, it really doesn't matter what you buy, as long as it looks good. If you want one to use, you need to bear in mind selenium cell metering. If your selenium cell doesn't work, you're going to have to be able to do it manually. I would just assume that the selenium cell doesn't work. If you can't put your hands on it and look at it and see it function, just assume it's not going to work. And even if you do find one that has a working meter in it, don't plan on it working forever. This many years after the fact, they get twitchy, they get tweaky, they corrode. The selenium cell is layers of I believe it's mineral and metal, and they corrode in between the layers, and that's what kills them. Anyhow, if you want one to use, make sure it has the manual override feature. This one, I've already put away the other one, but this one doesn't have it. You can tell because under the eyepiece it's going to have a little wheel, a little knurled wheel that you turn. It's also going to have a little green box at the end of the curved window that says manual. And other than that, it's just about functionality. Because if you can get one that works in manual and it seems to go through the motions, it'll probably take good pictures. Again, you're going to want to make sure that the lenses are good. You can get them apart, but it's a process. All that being said, I think it's a good camera, and even after all these years, they can still take really good pictures in it, and they're just fun to use, and they're cool, and you don't ever see them out in public. So it's a piece of history. It's 60 years old, and they're great to use. And with that, until next